Picture this. It's 3 in the morning in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. While the rest of the world sleeps, a young woman named Sarah sits by candlelight, carefully packing a small bag with the few possessions she can call her own. Tomorrow, she will make a choice that will change her life forever. A choice that could result in her being completely cut off from her family, her community, and everything she has ever known. Sarah is Amish, and she's about to discover that leaving her world behind is far more complicated and dangerous than she ever imagined. For centuries, the Amish have lived among us, yet remained apart from us. Their horse-drawn buggies clip-clop down country roads past our modern cars. Their simple wooden homes stand in stark contrast to our suburban neighborhoods. Their children play in yards without swing sets or bicycles, while ours are glued to screens. We see them at farmers' markets, selling fresh produce and handmade quilts, their faces peaceful and content. They seem to live in a simpler time, untouched by the chaos and corruption of the modern world. But what if everything you think you know about the Amish is wrong? What if behind those peaceful facades and quaint bonnets lies a world of secrets so dark and hidden that most outsiders never glimpse the truth? What if the very isolation that protects their way of life also conceals practices that would shock and disturb you? Tonight, we're going to pull back the curtain on the Amish society and reveal 10 secrets that the community has worked for generations to keep hidden from the outside world. These aren't stories about barn raisings and butter churning. These are stories about power, control, and the price some pay for preserving tradition in a modern world. Our journey begins in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania in the 1690s when a man named Jacob Ammon broke away from the Mennonite church, taking his followers with him. Ammon believed that the Mennonites had become too worldly, too accepting of modern conveniences and ideas. He demanded a return to the strictest interpretation of Christian living, a life of simplicity, humility, and complete separation from the outside world. What Ammon created was more than just a religious movement. He built a system of social control so complete and so effective that it has survived virtually unchanged for over 3 centuries. The Amish call it the Ordnung, an unwritten code of conduct that governs every aspect of daily life, from the color of clothing to the width of hat brims, from who can speak in church to how children must behave at all times.
The Ordnung is not a gentle guide. It is an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. It dictates that community conformity is more important than individual happiness. It demands absolute obedience to church leaders. And it contains within it the power to destroy anyone who dares to question or challenge the established order. Today, there are over 350,000 Amish people living in North America, spread across 32 states and 3 Canadian provinces. Their numbers have doubled every generation for the past century. To outsiders, this growth represents the success of their peaceful way of life. But the reality is far more complex. The Amish population grows not just because families are large, but because leaving the community is made nearly impossible through a combination of emotional manipulation, economic control, and psychological conditioning that begins in infancy. Let's start with the first secret, one that goes to the very heart of what it means to be Amish. The secret of shunning, a weapon of social destruction. The most powerful tool in the Amish arsenal of control is called the Meidung, or shunning. Most people have heard of shunning and think they understand it. The Amish will stop talking to someone who breaks the rules. It sounds almost quaint, like a religious version of the silent treatment. The reality is far more devastating. When the Amish shun someone, they don't just stop talking to them, they erase them from existence. The shunned person becomes a ghost among their own people. Their spouse can no longer eat at the same table with them. Their children are forbidden to acknowledge them. Their parents will cross the street to avoid passing them on the sidewalk. Business owners will refuse to serve them. Even their own siblings will act as if they have died. But here's the cruel twist. The shunning can be lifted at any time if the person confesses their sins publicly and begs for forgiveness. This creates a psychological torture chamber where the victim is constantly reminded that their isolation is a choice. They can end their suffering at any moment by surrendering their independence and submitting completely to the authority of the church. The story of Mary Byler illustrates the devastating power of shunning. Mary was born into an Old Order Amish family in Ohio. She married young, as expected, and had 4 children. But Mary began to question some of the restrictions placed on women in her community. She wondered why women couldn't speak in church, why they couldn't make decisions about their own children's education, why they had to ask permission from male relatives for even simple activities. When Mary began expressing these thoughts to other women, the bishop paid her a visit. He told her that such questions were evidence of pride and worldliness. He ordered her to confess her sins publicly and promise never to voice such thoughts again. Mary refused. She believed that questioning and seeking understanding were not sins, but natural parts of faith.
The response was swift and merciless. Mary was placed under the ban. Overnight, her world collapsed. Her husband was instructed to move her belongings to the barn and to sleep in a separate bed. Her children were told they could not hug her mother or even speak to her unless it was absolutely necessary for household functions. Her own parents and siblings behaved as if she had ceased to exist. The psychological impact was devastating. Mary had never lived outside the Amish community. She had no education beyond 8th grade, no job skills, no money of her own, and no friends in the outside world. The Amish had made sure of that. From birth, she had been taught that the English world was evil and dangerous, that leaving the community meant certain damnation. For months, Mary endured this living death. She watched her children grow distant and confused. She saw her husband struggling with the impossible position he had been placed in. She felt her own sanity slipping away as the isolation and rejection wore down her spirit day by day. Finally, Mary broke. She stood before the congregation and tearfully confessed to the sin of pride. She begged for forgiveness and promised never again to question the wisdom of the church leaders. The shunning was lifted, but Mary was never the same. The light had gone out of her eyes. She had learned the lesson the Amish intended, that individual thought and personal autonomy would not be tolerated. But shunning isn't just used against adults who question authority. It's also used as a weapon against young people who show signs of wanting to leave the community. And this brings us to our second dark secret.
But there's a catch, and it's a big one. During Rumspringa, these teenagers are not taught how to navigate the outside world. They receive no guidance on how to get a job, manage money, or form healthy relationships. They're not helped to understand the difference between freedom and license. Instead, they're turned loose like sheep among wolves, with predictable results. Many Rumspringa teens engage in dangerous and self-destructive behavior. They experiment with drugs and alcohol. They get into trouble with the law.
They form unhealthy relationships. They make terrible financial decisions. The outside world, which they have been taught to fear all their lives, proves to be just as dangerous and corrupt as their parents said it would be. Meanwhile, their Amish friends and family watch from a distance. They don't condemn the behavior. That would defeat the purpose. Instead, they wait patiently, knowing that the teenager will eventually come running back to the safety and security of the community. And when they do return, they are baptized into the church with gratitude and relief, convinced that they have made the right choice. The statistics speak for themselves. Despite this apparent freedom to leave, over 90% of Amish youth choose to be baptized and remain in the community. This isn't because Amish life is so wonderful that nearly everyone chooses it freely. It's because the entire system is designed to make leaving feel impossible and staying feel like salvation. Consider the story of Jacob Miller, whose Rumspringa began at age 16. Jacob had always been curious about the outside world, and when he was finally allowed to explore it, he threw himself into the experience with abandon. He got a job at a gas station, bought a car, and started hanging out with English teenagers. Within months, he was drinking heavily and experimenting with drugs. His new friends introduced him to a world of casual sex and petty crime. Jacob's behavior became increasingly reckless. He was arrested twice for drunk driving. He got involved with a girl who became pregnant, then abandoned her when the relationship became complicated. He racked up thousands of dollars in debt buying things he couldn't afford. His life spiraled out of control in ways that seemed to confirm everything his parents had taught him about the dangers of the outside world. After 2 years of chaos and self-destruction, Jacob came home. He confessed his sins, was baptized, and married a young Amish woman chosen by his parents. To outsiders, it looked like a young man who had sown his wild oats and chosen to return to his roots. But Jacob knew the truth. He hadn't really chosen anything. He had been manipulated into making the only choice the system would allow him to make. The tragedy is that Jacob might have thrived in the outside world if he had been properly prepared for it, if he had been taught life skills, given emotional support, and helped to understand that freedom comes with responsibility. He might have built a successful and fulfilling life. Instead, he was set up to fail so that his failure would serve as a cautionary tale for the next generation.
This manipulation of choice brings us to our third secret, one that strikes at the heart of human dignity and individual rights. The secret of education, keeping minds in chains. The Amish have fought legal battles for decades to limit their children's education to 8 grades. They've argued that further education is unnecessary for their simple way of life, and that prolonged schooling exposes children to worldly influences that threaten their faith. Courts have generally sided with the Amish, viewing this as a matter of religious freedom. But the real reason the Amish limit education has nothing to do with protecting faith, and everything to do with maintaining control. An educated population is a questioning population. People with broader knowledge and critical thinking skills are more likely to challenge authority, seek alternatives, and make independent choices. For a community that depends on absolute conformity for its survival, education is not a blessing, but a threat. Amish schools are carefully controlled environments where learning is severely limited. Children are taught basic reading, writing, and arithmetic, but little else. They learn no science beyond the most elementary level. They study no history except biblical history and selective Amish history.
They are exposed to no literature except approved religious texts. They learn no foreign languages. They receive no sex education. They are taught nothing about the legal system, their constitutional rights, or how to navigate the modern world. Most importantly, they are never taught to think critically or question authority. The entire educational philosophy is based on memorization and obedience. Students who ask too many questions or challenge information are quickly corrected and often punished. The message is clear. Your job is to accept what you're told, not to think for yourself. This educational limitation has devastating consequences that last a lifetime. Amish adults who try to leave the community find themselves functionally illiterate when it comes to surviving in the modern world. They don't understand basic concepts like credit scores, insurance, or legal contracts. They have no idea how to apply for jobs, apartments, or government services. They lack the knowledge to pursue higher education or professional training.
Rebecca eventually managed to get her GED and enroll in community college, but it was a struggle that took years of her life. She had to learn not just academic subjects, but basic life skills that most people take for granted. She had to overcome the psychological conditioning that told her she was stupid and incapable of learning. Most heartbreaking of all, she had to do it alone, with no support from her family or former community. The educational limitation is particularly cruel for Amish women, who receive even less preparation for independence than men. Women are taught that their role is to be wives and mothers, nothing more. They learn domestic skills, but nothing that would allow them to support themselves if they needed to. This economic dependence becomes another chain that keeps them bound to the community, even when they want to leave. The Amish defense of limited education is that their children don't need more learning because they will live simple lives as farmers and craftspeople. But this argument falls apart when you look at the actual economic reality of Amish communities. Many Amish today work in factories, run businesses, and interact regularly with the outside world. They use modern tools, handle complex financial transactions, and navigate government regulations. They clearly need more education than they receive, but the leaders resist it because knowledge is power, and they have no intention of sharing power with their followers. This brings us to our fourth secret, one that reveals the stark inequality that exists within these supposedly egalitarian communities. The secret of wealth and power, the Amish elite. The popular image of Amish society is one of equality and simplicity. Everyone dresses the same, lives in similar homes, and works with their hands. There are no obvious displays of wealth or status. The impression given to outsiders is that the Amish have created a society where material possessions don't matter and everyone is equal in the eyes of God. This image is carefully maintained, but fundamentally false. Amish society has a rigid hierarchy with enormous disparities in wealth and power. At the top are the bishops, ministers, and deacons who make all important decisions for the community. Below them are the established families who own the best land and the most successful businesses. At the bottom are the newer members, the poor, and anyone who has ever challenged the authority of the leaders. Meanwhile, poor Amish families struggle to make ends meet. They live in overcrowded conditions, work long hours for low wages, and have little hope of improving their situation. Their children are less likely to receive good marriages or business opportunities. If they fall behind on their bills or need help during hard times, they must humble themselves before the wealthy leaders and beg for assistance. The story of Eli Troyer reveals how this system works. Eli was born into a poor Amish family in Holmes County, Ohio.
His father worked as a day laborer for wealthier Amish farmers, never earning enough to buy land of his own. When Eli came of age, he wanted to start his own carpentry business, but he needed money for tools and materials. He approached several wealthy members of his community for loans, but was turned down repeatedly. The stated reason was that he was too young and inexperienced, but the real reason was that his family had no influence or status in the community. Eli finally got his break when he agreed to work for below-market wages for one of the bishop's relatives. He spent years building up this man's business while barely earning enough to support his own growing family. When he finally had saved enough to start his own shop, he discovered that the bishop had used his influence to ensure that Eli would not be able to compete for the best contracts. The wealthy families had agreed among themselves to give their business only to established contractors who knew their place in the hierarchy. Frustrated and bitter, Eli began to speak out about the inequality he saw in his community. He pointed out that the bishop lived in luxury while poor families struggled to feed their children. He questioned why some Amish could afford expensive medical treatments while others had to rely on folk remedies and prayer. He suggested that the community's wealth should be shared more equally among all members. The response was swift and predictable. Eli was called before the bishop and told that his attitude showed dangerous signs of pride and worldliness. He was ordered to confess his sins and accept his station in life. When he refused, he was shunned. His business dried up overnight as community members were forbidden to hire him. His wife, who came from a more established family, was pressured to leave him. Eventually, she did, taking their children with her. Eli's story illustrates how wealth and power work in Amish society. The system appears egalitarian on the surface, but underneath it's as stratified as any other hierarchical society. The difference is that the inequality is hidden behind a facade of religious simplicity and community solidarity. Those at the top maintain their position by claiming that God has blessed them for their faithfulness, while those at the bottom are told that their poverty is evidence of their spiritual failings. This hidden inequality is particularly evident in the fifth secret we need to explore: the treatment of women in Amish society.
The secret of women's subjugation, silent suffering behind bonnets. The Amish woman, in her simple dress and white bonnet, has become an icon of peaceful domesticity. She's portrayed as content with her role as wife and mother, finding fulfillment in serving her family and community. Her quiet demeanor is seen as evidence of inner peace and spiritual satisfaction. She appears to be protected and cherished by a society that values family above all else. The reality for many Amish women is far different. They live in a patriarchal system so complete and so rigid that it would have been familiar to women in medieval times. From birth to death, an Amish woman is under the authority of men, first her father, then her husband, and finally her sons if she becomes widowed. She has no independent legal rights, no control over financial decisions, and little say in the major choices that affect her life. Amish women cannot speak in church services. They cannot hold leadership positions in the community. They cannot make decisions about their children's education or medical care without their husband's approval. They cannot start businesses or make significant purchases without permission. In many communities, they cannot even choose their own clothing colors or hairstyles. These are dictated by the ordnung and enforced by the other women under the watchful eye of the male leadership. The psychological impact of this subjugation is devastating. Amish women are taught from infancy that they are naturally inferior to men in intelligence, judgment, and spiritual authority.
They're told that their only value comes through serving men and bearing children. They're conditioned to suppress their own needs, desires, and opinions in favor of absolute obedience and submission. The story of Martha Schrock illustrates the tragic consequences of this system. Martha was born into a strict old-order Amish family in Pennsylvania. She was bright and curious as a child, but these qualities were quickly discouraged. She was taught that asking too many questions was a sign of pride, and that a good woman should be content with what men decided was best for her. Martha married at 19 to a man chosen by her parents. She had no say in the decision and barely knew her husband before the wedding. She quickly discovered that he was controlling and abusive, but when she tried to talk to her parents about her unhappiness, they told her that marriage was a cross she must bear and that a good wife would find ways to please her husband better. Over the next 15 years, Martha had 9 children. Each pregnancy was harder than the last, and she developed serious health problems that her husband refused to let her treat with modern medicine. He believed that her suffering was God's will, and that seeking medical help showed a lack of faith. Martha grew weaker and more depressed with each passing year, but she was trapped in a system that offered no escape and no support.
When Martha finally collapsed and was taken to a hospital by concerned neighbors, doctors discovered that she had developed severe anemia and other complications that could have been easily treated years earlier. But the damage to her mental health was harder to repair. Years of being told she was worthless had destroyed her self-esteem. Years of having her opinions dismissed had convinced her that she was incapable of making good decisions. Years of isolation had left her with no friends or support system outside her family. Martha's story is not unusual. Many Amish women suffer in silence, their pain hidden behind the facade of peaceful domesticity that the community presents to the outside world. They develop depression, anxiety, and other mental health problems that go untreated because seeking help would be seen as a lack of faith. They endure physical abuse because leaving their husbands would result in shunning and the loss of their children. They watch their daughters being conditioned for the same life of subjugation and feel powerless to protect them. The most insidious aspect of this oppression is how it's justified through religious teaching. Women are told that their subjugation is not oppression, but divine order. They're taught that God created them to be helpers and followers, not leaders and decision makers. They're convinced that accepting their inferior status is not just necessary for community harmony, but essential for their eternal salvation. This religious justification makes it almost impossible for women to resist or even recognize their oppression. They've been conditioned to see their lack of rights not as injustice, but righteousness. They've been taught to find their identity entirely through their relationships to men, rather than through their own achievements or desires. They've been convinced that questioning the system is not just rebellion against men, but rebellion against God Himself. This leads us to our 6th secret, one that reveals how the Amish use religion not just to guide behavior, but to control minds. The secret of spiritual manipulation: fear as a tool of control. Religion is supposed to be a source of comfort, hope, and spiritual growth. In Amish communities, however, religion has been weaponized as a tool of psychological control. The Amish version of Christianity bears little resemblance to the message of love and redemption found in the New Testament. Instead, it's a harsh system of rules and punishments designed to keep people in line through fear and guilt. From earliest childhood, Amish children are taught that they are inherently sinful and deserving of punishment.
They're told that God is watching their every move and that the smallest transgression will result in eternal damnation. They're taught that questioning religious authority is equivalent to questioning God Himself. They're convinced that leaving the Amish community means abandoning not just their family, but their hope of salvation.
This fear-based theology serves several purposes for the community leaders. First, it ensures compliance with even the most arbitrary rules. When people believe that wearing the wrong color dress or using the wrong kind of button could send them to hell, they're unlikely to challenge the authority of those who interpret God's will. Second, it makes leaving the community feel like spiritual suicide. Third, it creates a population of anxious, guilt-ridden people who are constantly seeking reassurance from religious authorities. The psychological damage caused by this system is enormous. Many former Amish struggle with severe anxiety, depression, and PTSD-like symptoms long after leaving their communities. They've been so thoroughly conditioned to fear God's wrath that they can't shake the feeling that they're doomed to eternal punishment. They've been taught that they're worthless sinners who deserve whatever suffering they experience. Consider the experience of Samuel Yoder, who grew up in an ultra-conservative Amish community in Wisconsin. From his earliest memories, Samuel was terrified of going to hell. His parents, teachers, and preachers constantly reminded him that he was a sinner who deserved God's punishment. Every mistake he made, no matter how small, was treated as evidence of his corrupt nature. Every natural childhood impulse was labeled as evil and requiring repentance. Samuel became obsessed with trying to be perfect. He monitored his every thought and action, convinced that God was keeping a detailed record of his sins. He developed severe anxiety and began having panic attacks when he was just 8 years old. His parents interpreted these symptoms as evidence that he was being convicted of his sins by the Holy Spirit and needed to pray harder for forgiveness. As Samuel grew older, his mental health continued to deteriorate. He became convinced that he was beyond redemption, that his sins were too numerous and too severe for God to forgive. He began having thoughts of suicide, believing that it would be better to die than to continue living in such a state of spiritual corruption. When he tried to talk to the bishop about his struggles, he was told that his problems were caused by pride and self-focus, and that he needed to stop thinking about himself and concentrate on serving God. When Samuel finally left the Amish community at age 25, he was a psychological wreck. He had been so thoroughly conditioned to fear and hate himself that he couldn't function in the outside world. It took years of therapy and medication for him to overcome the damage that had been done to his mind and spirit. Even today, decades later, he still struggles with the voices in his head telling him that he's worthless and doomed. The spiritual manipulation used by the Amish goes beyond just creating fear. It also involves redefining basic concepts like love, family, and loyalty in ways that serve the interests of the community leaders. Children are taught that love means absolute obedience, that family means unconditional submission to authority, and that loyalty means never questioning or challenging the established order.
This redefinition creates cognitive dissonance that keeps people trapped in the system. When someone is unhappy with their treatment in the community, they're told that their unhappiness is evidence of their selfishness and lack of love for their family. When they question unfair rules or practices, they're told that their questioning shows disloyalty and ingratitude for all the community has done for them. When they express a desire for more freedom or autonomy, they're told that such desires are worldly and sinful. The most tragic aspect of this spiritual manipulation is how it destroys people's ability to trust their own moral instincts. The Amish are taught that their natural human responses, their desire for fairness, their need for love and acceptance, their longing for growth and self-expression,
are all evidence of their sinful nature. They learn to distrust their own feelings and rely entirely on external authorities to tell them what's right and wrong. This brings us to our seventh secret, one that reveals how the Amish maintain their isolation not just through choice, but through deliberate deception. The secret of deception: the lies told to outsiders. The Amish have mastered the art of public relations. They present a carefully crafted image to the outside world that emphasizes their peaceful nature, their strong family values, and their commitment to simple living. This image is so appealing that it has generated billions of dollars in tourism revenue and created a generally positive perception of Amish communities among the general public. But much of what outsiders believe about the Amish is based on deliberate deception. The community leaders understand that their survival depends on maintaining good relationships with the outside world. So they have developed sophisticated strategies for hiding their darker practices while highlighting their more appealing qualities. When journalists visit Amish communities, they are shown only what the leaders want them to see. They meet hand-picked families who have been coached on what to say and what not to mention. They are taken to model farms and businesses that don't represent the typical Amish experience. They are told stories about community cooperation and mutual support that gloss over the harsh realities of social control and economic inequality. The Amish are particularly skilled at using their children as props in this deception. Outsiders are charmed by well-behaved Amish children in their quaint clothing, helping with farm chores and attending one-room schoolhouses. What they don't see is the psychological pressure these children face, the limited opportunities available to them, or the fear that keeps them in line.
The story of the Nickel Mines school shooting in 2006 illustrates how the Amish manipulate public perception even in the face of tragedy. When a gunman killed 5 Amish school children and wounded 5 others, the community's response was widely praised for its emphasis on forgiveness and reconciliation. The Amish families publicly forgave the shooter and reached out to his widow with support and comfort. While this response was genuinely compassionate in many ways, it also served the community's public relations interests perfectly. The story of Amish forgiveness dominated media coverage, reinforcing the image of the Amish as uniquely peaceful and Christ-like people. What got lost in the coverage was any serious examination of whether the Amish approach to dealing with violence and trauma was actually healthy for the victims and their families. In the years following the shooting, some family members struggled with depression and PTSD, but they were discouraged from seeking professional help because it might suggest that their faith and the community's support weren't sufficient for healing. Children who witnessed the attack were expected to forgive and move on without processing their trauma in healthy ways. The emphasis on forgiveness, while admirable, became another form of pressure to suppress natural human emotions and responses. The Amish have also been deceptive about their relationship with modern technology and the outside world. They present themselves as people who have rejected modernity in favor of a simpler way of life, but the reality is far more complex. Many Amish communities have found ways to use modern technology while maintaining the appearance of simplicity. They hire non-Amish drivers to transport them in modern vehicles. They use power tools in their businesses. They rely on modern medicine when their folk remedies fail. This selective modernization is not necessarily hypocritical. All communities adapt to changing circumstances. But the Amish presentation of their choices as based on consistent religious principles rather than practical considerations is misleading. They want the benefits of both worlds, the economic advantages of modern technology and the public relations benefits of appearing to reject it. The deception is particularly evident in how the Amish handle financial matters. They present themselves as people who live simply and don't care about material wealth.
But many Amish communities have become quite sophisticated in their business dealings. They use modern accounting practices, engage in complex financial transactions, and accumulate significant wealth. They just do it quietly and behind the scenes. Some Amish businesses employ dozens of workers and generate millions of dollars in revenue. They use modern marketing techniques to sell their products, often emphasizing their Amish origins as a selling point. They negotiate complex contracts with suppliers and customers. They engage in practices that would be familiar to any modern business owner.
This economic sophistication contradicts the image of simple farmers and craftspeople that the Amish promote to outsiders. It reveals a community that is far more integrated with the modern economy than most people realize. But admitting this integration would undermine the carefully constructed image that serves their interests so well. This leads us to our eighth secret, one that reveals how the Amish deal with crime and abuse within their communities. The secret of hidden crimes, justice denied behind closed doors. One of the most disturbing secrets of Amish life is how the community handles criminal behavior. When crimes occur within Amish communities, and they do occur with disturbing frequency, they are rarely reported to outside authorities. Instead, the Amish have developed their own system of justice that prioritizes protecting the community's reputation over protecting victims and ensuring accountability. This system has created a culture where abuse can flourish unchecked. Sexual abuse, in particular, is a serious problem in many Amish communities, but it's often handled through informal church discipline rather than criminal prosecution. Abusers may be required to confess their sins publicly and ask for forgiveness, but they rarely face serious consequences for their actions. Meanwhile, victims are pressured to forgive their abusers and remain silent about their experiences. The case of Mary Byler, not the same Mary mentioned earlier, illustrates how this system fails victims. Mary was sexually abused by her uncle for years, starting when she was just 7 years old. When she finally found the courage to tell her parents about the abuse, they were horrified, but decided to handle the matter within the community rather than involving outside authorities. The uncle was brought before the bishop and forced to confess his sins publicly. He claimed to be repentant and asked for forgiveness from both God and his victim. The community accepted his confession and allowed him to remain in the church after a brief period of discipline. Mary, meanwhile, was told that she needed to forgive her uncle and never speak of the matter again. The abuse continued. The uncle, emboldened by the lack of real consequences, began targeting other children in the community. When Mary tried to warn other families, she was told that she was being vindictive and unforgiving. The community leaders accused her of trying to destroy a man who had repented of his sins and been forgiven by God. Eventually, Mary left the Amish community and reported the abuse to outside authorities. A criminal investigation revealed that the uncle had abused dozens of children over more than 2 decades. He was finally arrested and sentenced to prison, but only after years of abuse that could have been prevented if the community had handled the initial report properly.
Mary's story is not unique. Researchers who have studied abuse in Amish communities have found patterns of systematic cover-ups and victim silencing. The emphasis on forgiveness and community harmony creates an environment where predators can operate with impunity. Children who are abused are often told that reporting the abuse would bring shame on their families and damage the community's reputation. The problem is made worse by the Amish reluctance to involve outside authorities in any matter affecting the community. They view the English legal system as worldly and corrupt, and they believe that church discipline is more effective than secular punishment in dealing with sinful behavior. This attitude might be defensible if church discipline actually worked, but the evidence suggests that it often fails to protect victims or prevent future crimes. The Amish system of justice is particularly inadequate when dealing with domestic violence. Women who are abused by their husbands are told that marriage is sacred and that they must find ways to be better wives. They're encouraged to pray for their husbands and to examine their own behavior for ways they might be provoking the violence. Leaving an abusive marriage is strongly discouraged and can result in shunning. The story of Anna Miller demonstrates the tragic consequences of this approach. Anna married young to a man who seemed kind and gentle during their courtship, but soon after the wedding, he began to show his true nature. He was controlling and jealous, monitoring Anna's every move and forbidding her to have friendships with other women. When she failed to meet his impossible standards, he would fly into rages that often turned violent. Anna tried talking to her mother and sisters about the abuse, but they told her that all marriages had difficulties and that she needed to be more submissive and patient. When she approached the bishop for help, he counseled her to pray harder and to remember that her husband was the head of the household as God intended. He suggested that her rebellious attitude might be causing her husband's anger. The abuse escalated over the years, becoming more frequent and more severe. Anna's husband broke her ribs, gave her black eyes, and once threw her down a flight of stairs. But each time she sought help from the community, she was told to forgive and try harder. The emphasis was always on preserving the marriage rather than protecting her safety. Anna finally reached her breaking point when her husband began abusing their children. She packed what few belongings she could carry and fled to a women's shelter in a nearby English town. The community's response was swift and harsh. Anna was shunned for abandoning her marriage vows and breaking up her family. Her children were taken from her and given to relatives who would raise them in the faith. She was told that she could return at any time if she was willing to go back to her husband and submit to church discipline.
Anna never returned. She eventually rebuilt her life in the outside world, but she lost everything that had mattered to her: her children, her family, her community, and her faith. The system that was supposed to protect and nurture her had instead enabled her abuse and punished her for seeking safety. The Amish approach to crime and justice reveals a fundamental flaw in their social system. By prioritizing community reputation and harmony over individual rights and safety, they create an environment where the powerful can prey on the vulnerable with little fear of consequences. The emphasis on forgiveness, while admirable in many contexts, becomes a tool of oppression when it's used to silence victims and protect perpetrators. This system of hidden justice brings us to our ninth secret, one that reveals the psychological toll of living in such a controlled environment. The secret of mental health crisis, minds breaking under pressure. Mental illness is a taboo subject in most Amish communities. Depression, anxiety, and other psychological problems are seen as evidence of spiritual weakness or lack of faith. People who struggle with mental health issues are told to pray harder, work more, and stop feeling sorry for themselves. Professional mental health treatment is discouraged or forbidden entirely, leaving those who suffer with few options for help. This attitude toward mental health creates a crisis that most outsiders never see. The rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide in Amish communities are significantly higher than in the general population, but these problems are hidden behind the facade of peaceful contentment that the community presents to the world. The rigid social control, limited opportunities, and constant pressure to conform create enormous psychological stress for many Amish people. those who don't fit the narrow mold of what an Amish person should be, the naturally curious, the artistically inclined, the intellectually gifted, the emotionally sensitive, often develop serious mental health problems as they struggle to suppress their true nature and force themselves into acceptable patterns. The story of David Schwartz illustrates the devastating impact of this system on mental health. David was a gifted artist who loved to draw and paint from an early age. His natural talent was remarkable, but in his conservative Amish community, artistic expression was seen as prideful and worldly. David was repeatedly punished for drawing and told that such activities were a waste of time that could be better spent on useful work.
As David grew older, the pressure to suppress his artistic nature intensified. He was expected to focus on farming and eventually take over his father's land. But farming held no interest for him, and he struggled with the physical demands of agricultural work. His lack of enthusiasm was interpreted as laziness and rebellion, leading to increased pressure from his family and community. David began to experience severe depression in his late teens. He lost interest in activities he had once enjoyed, had trouble sleeping, and felt hopeless about his future. When he tried to talk to his parents about his feelings, they told him that he was being selfish and ungrateful. The bishop suggested that his problems were caused by too much thinking and not enough work. As David's depression worsened, he began having thoughts of suicide. He felt trapped in a life that held no meaning or joy for him, but he saw no way out that wouldn't result in the loss of everything he had ever known. The community's attitude toward mental health meant that seeking professional help was not an option. He was expected to overcome his problems through prayer and willpower alone. David's mental health continued to deteriorate until he suffered a complete breakdown at age 24. He was found by his family in a state of catatonic depression, unable to speak or care for himself. Even then, the community resisted sending him to a hospital, believing that his condition was spiritual rather than medical. It was only when it became clear that he might die without treatment that they reluctantly agreed to seek outside help. David spent months in a psychiatric hospital where he was diagnosed with severe clinical depression and began receiving proper treatment. The medication and therapy helped stabilize his condition, but his recovery was complicated by the knowledge that returning to his community would mean giving up the treatment that had saved his life. The Amish considered his medication to be a crutch that showed lack of faith, and they expected him to rely solely on prayer and community support for his mental health. Faced with an impossible choice, David ultimately decided to leave his community permanently. He knew that this decision would result in shunning and the loss of his family, but he also knew that staying would likely lead to his death. Today, David lives in the English world where he has found success as an artist and maintains his mental health through continued treatment. But the cost of his survival was enormous. He lost everyone and everything he had grown up loving. David's story is repeated in various forms throughout Amish communities. Young people who struggle with anxiety, depression, or other mental health issues are told that their problems are character flaws rather than medical conditions. They're expected to overcome their struggles through faith and hard work without access to the treatments that could actually help them. The situation is particularly tragic for those who suffer from serious mental illnesses like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. These conditions require professional treatment to manage effectively, but the Amish understanding of mental illness makes it nearly impossible for sufferers to get the help they need. Some end up in tragic situations where their untreated illness leads to dangerous behavior or complete social breakdown. The high rates of suicide in Amish communities are a direct result of this failure to address mental health properly. Young people who see no hope for a different future and no help for their suffering sometimes choose death as their only escape. These tragedies are often hushed up by the community, which adds another layer of shame and secrecy to an already difficult situation. The mental health crisis in Amish communities is made worse by the isolation and limited support systems available to those who struggle. In the outside world, people with mental health issues can find support groups, therapists, medications, and other resources to help them cope. In Amish communities, those who struggle are often alone with their pain, surrounded by people who don't understand their condition and may blame them for their suffering. This crisis of mental health leads us to our final and perhaps most disturbing secret, one that reveals the ultimate cost of the Amish system of social control. The secret of broken lives, the hidden casualties of control. Behind every quaint image of Amish life, behind every romanticized story of simple living and strong community bonds, lies a trail of broken lives and shattered dreams. The Amish system of social control, while effective at preserving their traditional way of life, creates casualties that most people never see or hear about. These casualties take many forms. There are the children who grow up believing they're worthless and destined for failure. There are the women who spend their entire lives in submission and silence, never knowing their own worth or potential. There are the men who struggle under impossible expectations and find no outlet for their frustrations. There are the elderly who are abandoned when they can no longer contribute to the community's economic well-being. But perhaps the most tragic casualties are those who try to leave the Amish world and find themselves completely unprepared for life on the outside. These individuals have been so thoroughly conditioned by the Amish system that they struggle to function as independent adults in the modern world. They lack the education, skills, and emotional preparation necessary to build successful lives outside their communities. The story of Ruth Beachy illustrates the devastating impact on those who leave. Ruth grew up in a strict, old-order Amish family in Lancaster County. She was bright and curious, but these qualities made her a target for criticism and correction. She was repeatedly told that her questions showed pride and that her desire to learn was evidence of worldly thinking. Ruth married at 18 to a man chosen by her parents, but the marriage was troubled from the start. Her husband was controlling and emotionally abusive, treating her more like a servant than a partner. When Ruth tried to talk to her family about her unhappiness, she was told that her problems were caused by her own rebellious attitude and that she needed to be more submissive. After years of unhappiness, Ruth made the difficult decision to leave her community. She packed a small bag with her few possessions and walked away from the only life she had ever known. But she quickly discovered that leaving was only the beginning of her struggles. Ruth had no education beyond 8th grade, no job skills, no credit history, and no understanding of how the modern world worked. She didn't know how to apply for a job, rent an apartment, or open a bank account. She had never used a computer, driven a car, or even made a phone call. The outside world that she had dreamed of as a place of freedom turned out to be a confusing and hostile environment where she was constantly reminded of her ignorance and inadequacy. Ruth's first job was cleaning offices for minimum wage. She worked long hours for little pay, but she was grateful to have any income at all. She rented a tiny, run-down apartment in a dangerous neighborhood because it was all she could afford. She had no friends, no support system, and no one to help her navigate the complexities of life outside the Amish community. The emotional toll was even harder than the practical challenges. Ruth had been shunned by her family and community, which meant that she could never go home again. She had lost not just her relationships, but her entire identity. Everything she had believed about herself and the world had been shaped by her Amish upbringing,
and now she had to rebuild her understanding of life from scratch. Ruth struggled with severe depression and anxiety as she tried to adapt to her new life. She had nightmares about going to hell for abandoning her faith. She was plagued with self-doubt and feelings of worthlessness that had been ingrained in her since childhood. She had no idea how to form healthy relationships or make good decisions about her future. Ruth took years to build a stable life in the outside world. She eventually got her GED, learned to drive, and found better employment. She made friends and even started dating. But the scars from her Amish upbringing never fully healed. She continued to struggle with low self-esteem, difficulty trusting others, and a lingering fear that she was fundamentally flawed and unworthy of happiness.
The tragedy is that many of these broken lives could have been prevented if the Amish system were less rigid and controlling. If children were allowed to explore their interests and develop their talents, if education were valued rather than limited, if mental health were treated as a medical issue rather than a spiritual failing, if leaving the community weren't made so difficult and traumatic, then many of these casualties could have been avoided. But the Amish system is not designed to maximize individual happiness or potential. It's designed to preserve a particular way of life at any cost. The casualties are not accidents or unfortunate side effects. They're inevitable consequences of a system that values conformity over individuality, control over freedom, and tradition over human dignity. The most heartbreaking aspect of these broken lives is that they're largely invisible to the outside world. The Amish are skilled at hiding their failures and presenting only their successes to tourists. Tourists who visit Amish communities see happy families working together in peaceful harmony. They don't see the depression, abuse, and desperation that often lies beneath the surface. They don't meet the people who have been broken by the system or driven away from everything they once loved. Conclusion: the price of paradise. As we reach the end of our journey into the hidden world of Amish life, we return to Sarah, the young woman we met at the beginning, who sat by candlelight preparing to leave everything she had ever known. Sarah's story, like the stories of so many others we've encountered, illustrates the true cost of the Amish system of social control. Sarah did leave her community that night, carrying her small bag of possessions and a heart full of fear and hope. The journey that followed was even more difficult than she had imagined. She struggled with poverty, loneliness, and the constant pain of losing her family. She made mistakes, faced setbacks, and often wondered if she had made the right choice. But Sarah also discovered things she had never known were possible. She learned that she was intelligent and capable of more than she had ever been told. She found that the outside world, while challenging, was not the evil place she had been taught to fear. She discovered that freedom, while sometimes frightening, was worth the price she had paid for it. Most importantly, Sarah learned that she was not the worthless, sinful creature she had been taught to believe. She was a human being with inherent dignity and worth, deserving of love, respect, and the right to make her own choices about her life. The 10 secrets we've explored tonight reveal a disturbing truth about Amish society. Behind the peaceful facade of simple living and strong community bonds lies a system of control so complete and so effective that it has survived virtually unchanged for over 3 centuries.
This system uses shunning as a weapon of social destruction, manipulates the illusion of choice through Rumspringer, limits education to maintain control, conceals vast inequalities of wealth and power, subjugates women through systematic oppression, weaponizes religion as a tool of fear,
deceives outsiders about the true nature of their society, covers up crimes and abuse to protect their reputation, ignores mental health crises that result from their rigid system, and ultimately breaks the lives of those who don't conform to their narrow expectations. These secrets don't negate the genuine positive aspects of Amish life. Many Amish people do find happiness and fulfillment within their communities. The emphasis on family, hard work, and simple living offers real benefits in our complex modern world. The Amish have preserved valuable skills and traditions that might otherwise be lost. Their commitment to pacifism and environmental stewardship provides important examples for the broader society. But these positive aspects cannot excuse or justify the harm caused by their system of social control. The price paid by the casualties of this system, the abused children, the oppressed women, the broken spirits, the shattered lives, is too high to ignore or romanticize away. The Amish have the right to live according to their beliefs and traditions. Religious freedom is a fundamental principle that must be protected. But religious freedom does not include the right to abuse children, oppress women, or psychologically destroy those who question authority. It does not include the right to cover up crimes or deny people access to education and mental health care. As we've seen throughout our exploration, the Amish system survives not because it's benevolent, but because it's effective at controlling information and limiting options. People cannot make truly free choices when they lack education, economic independence, and knowledge of alternatives. They cannot give meaningful consent to a way of life when they've been psychologically conditioned from birth to fear any other option.
But now you know the truth. You've seen behind the bonnets and beards, past the horse-drawn buggies and one-room schoolhouses, into the hearts and minds of people trapped in a system that values conformity over compassion, control over kindness, and tradition over truth. The next time you see an Amish family at a farmer's market or driving their buggy down a country road, remember the stories you've heard tonight. Remember Sarah packing her bag by candlelight. Remember Mary enduring years of abuse in silence. Remember David struggling with depression while being told it was a spiritual failing. Remember Ruth trying to build a new life with nothing but determination and hope. Remember that behind every peaceful facade may lie secrets that society works hard to keep hidden. Remember that the price of paradise is often paid by those who have no choice in the matter. And remember that true freedom and dignity are worth fighting for, even when the cost seems too high to bear. The Amish will continue their way of life, preserving their traditions and maintaining their isolation from the modern world. But their secrets are secret no more. The truth has been told, and those who have ears to hear will understand that sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow in the darkest soil, and sometimes the most peaceful communities extract the highest price from those who dare to question, to dream, or to hope for something more. In the end, the story of the Amish is not just about one religious community in rural America. It's about the human cost of unchecked authority, the danger of systems that prioritize conformity over individuality, and the courage required to seek truth even when it challenges everything we thought we knew. It's a story that continues to unfold every day in small communities across the country, behind closed doors and beneath surface appearances. It's a story of broken lives and shattered dreams, but also of resilience and hope. It's a story that reminds us that freedom is never free, and that the price of paradise is often paid by those who never agreed to the transaction. The secrets of Amish life are now yours to carry. What you do with this knowledge, How you let it shape your understanding of community, authority, and individual rights is up to you. But you can never again look at those peaceful scenes of rural simplicity without remembering what you've learned about the shadows that lie beneath the surface. The truth is rarely as simple or as beautiful as the myths we create around it. But truth, however uncomfortable, is always worth knowing. And sometimes, knowing the truth is the first step toward changing it.